The letter penned by Pontius Pilate to the Roman Emperor Tiberius offers a fascinating and detailed glimpse into the life and impact of Jesus of Nazareth. This remarkable document contains vivid descriptions of Jesus's physical appearance, details that are absent from the Gospels, and recounts extraordinary events, including his miracles, trial, crucifixion, and even his resurrection. But what exactly does this letter reveal? What could Pilate, a Roman governor, have said to the emperor about the resurrection of the proclaimed Son of God and his striking physical presence? Pilate begins his letter to Emperor Tiberius with a tone of deference and urgency, writing, "Greetings, Your Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I feel the need to recount everything in detail, for I believe these events may, in the future, influence the fate of our nation. It seems that lately all the gods have turned away from us. I am almost willing to affirm that it was a cursed day when I took the place of Valerius in the governance of Judea, as since then my life has been filled with worry and anguish." Pilate reflects on the challenges he faced as the governor of Judea, particularly when he first arrived in Jerusalem. Taking possession of the praetorium, he organized a grand banquet to assert his authority and establish relations with key leaders. Among the invited guests were a tetrarch from Galilee, the high priest, and other officials. However, to his dismay, none of them attended. Pilate perceived this as a blatant affront to his authority and a show of disrespect toward the Roman government. Days later, the high priest visited Pilate, his demeanor marked by seriousness and duplicity. The priest claimed his religion prohibited him from dining with Romans, but his expression betrayed the insincerity of his words. Although Pilate diplomatically accepted the apology, he quickly discerned that the priest and his followers harbored hostility toward Roman rule. In his letter, Pilate warns the Romans about the treachery of Judea's high priests, stating, "I advise the Romans to be wary of the high priests of this land, for they would not hesitate to betray even their own mothers for power and wealth." Pilate paints a vivid picture of Jerusalem as a city seething with rebellion, describing the constant threat of uprisings. With limited military resources, a centurion and just 100 men under his command, Pilate requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, yet his plea was dismissed, as Syria itself lacked sufficient troops. Pilate laments the overextension of Roman ambitions, fearing that such imperial overreach might one day lead to the collapse of the empire. Despite these challenges, Pilate sought to understand the people he governed. Among the rumors circulating in Judea, one story captured his attention above all others. The account of a young man from Galilee preaching a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first, Pilate suspected this man, Jesus of Nazareth, of inciting rebellion against Rome. However, upon closer observation, he realized this was far from the truth. Jesus seemed more amicable toward the Romans than toward his own people. Pilate recounts an incident in which he observed Jesus speaking to a crowd under the shade of a tree. Pilate refrained from interrupting, instead instructing his secretary, Manlius, to discreetly listen and report back. Manlius, a trusted confidant fluent in Hebrew, returned with words of awe and admiration for Jesus' teachings. Pilate admits he had never encountered such wisdom, even in the works of great philosophers like Socrates or Plato. In one instance, Jesus was asked whether it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. His response, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's," left an indelible impression on Pilate. Recognizing Jesus' profound wisdom and peaceful demeanor, Pilate resolved to grant him freedom. As a representative of Roman justice, Pilate believed it would be unjust to arrest or exile a man whose teachings posed no threat to the stability of the province. Pilate, in his own words, reveals his internal conflict and foreboding. If ever, may the gods forbid it, the religion of our ancestors is replaced by that of Jesus, it will be this tolerance that leads to the fall of Rome, while I, as an unfortunate instrument, may have been part of what the Jews call providence and we call destiny. Pilate's protection of Jesus, however, angered the wealthiest and most influential Jewish leaders. Jesus' teachings were a direct affront to the scribes and Pharisees. Pilate recounts how Jesus condemned their hypocrisy, saying, "You are like snakes. You appear as painted tombs, beautiful on the outside, but filled with death on the inside." Jesus also criticized rigid traditions, emphasizing that humility was of greater value in the eyes of God than social status or wealth. The backlash against Jesus grew more intense. Pilate received frequent complaints about Jesus' audacity, accompanied by warnings that he might meet the fate of previous prophets stoned to death in Jerusalem. Pilate's portrayal of these events reveals a leader caught between the demands of his role and the growing realization that the man before him was no ordinary figure. An appeal to Caesar had been in preparation for some time, spurred by the growing unrest in the province. Yet, despite the volatile situation, the Senate ultimately approved my actions and assured me that reinforcements would arrive, but only after the Persian War. Left with insufficient troops to quell the tensions threatening to explode into full rebellion, I was forced to adopt measures that would restore peace without compromising my authority or dignity. It was then that I made the decision to summon Jesus of Nazareth to the Praetorium for a private conversation. To my astonishment, he accepted my invitation and came willingly. As a man of Spanish and Roman lineage, hardened by years of governance and warfare, I do not frighten easily, nor am I often moved by emotion. Yet when Jesus appeared, I found myself utterly unprepared for the effect his presence would have on me. Standing on my balcony, I watched as he approached the Praetorium with the grace and composure of one untouched by fear. The moment I saw him, I felt as if my feet were trapped in the marble beneath me. A tremor ran through me, not the kind born of physical weakness, but one rooted in guilt, awe, and the sheer weight of the moment. The Nazarene, by contrast, was serene, exuding an otherworldly tranquility that seemed to envelop him. He stopped just short of the balcony, raising his hand in a subtle gesture that commanded attention without a single word. It was as if his very presence spoke volumes, rendering speech unnecessary. For a long time, I stood in silence, unable to muster the composure to address him. My mind raced as I marveled at the man before me, a figure that no artist, no sculptor of gods or heroes could have imagined. He was both extraordinary and disarmingly simple. There was nothing imposing or repellent about him, yet his presence made me feel fragile, as though time itself weighed heavier in his company. Summoning my courage, I finally spoke, though my voice wavered despite my best efforts. "Jesus," I said, "Jesus of Nazareth, in the past 3 days I have granted you total freedom of expression, and I do not regret it. Your words are practical and wise. I do not know whether you have studied Socrates or Plato, but the simplicity and majesty of your speech elevate you far beyond those philosophers. The emperor himself is aware of this, and as his representative in this province, I am pleased to have afforded you the freedom you so clearly deserve." I paused, unsure of how to continue, before pressing on with the matter that had brought us together. "However," I continued, "I must warn you that your words have attracted powerful and misguided enemies. Socrates too had enemies and ultimately fell victim to them. Yours, I fear, are even more numerous and irate. They are angered by the sharpness of your words and embittered against me for allowing you to speak freely. Some even accuse me of conspiring with you to weaken the little civil power Rome still permits the Hebrews. My advice to you, not an order, but a sincere recommendation, is this: be cautious. Moderate your speeches. Your enemies may exploit the pride of the ignorant to incite rebellion, forcing me to act according to the law. Jesus listened in silence, his expression calm and his demeanor unshaken. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that made my own words feel hollow by comparison. "Ruler of the earth," he began, "your words do not come from true wisdom. Ask the Torah mountain to halt in the middle of the valley. It will tell you that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator God. Only He knows. I tell you the truth. Before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the just will be shed." His words pierced me to my core. Struggling to regain my composure, I replied, "Your blood will not be shed." My voice was steadier now, driven by a deep sense of conviction. "I value you and your wisdom far more than all those rebellious Pharisees who abuse the freedoms Rome has granted them. They conspire against Caesar, spreading lies that he is a tyrant bent on their destruction. These ungrateful ones fail to see that sometimes the wolf wears sheep's clothing to achieve its wicked goals. I will protect you from them, Jesus. My praetorium will serve as a sacred refuge for you day and night." Jesus, unperturbed by my words, shook his head gently. A serene smile graced his lips as he replied, "When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor under heaven. The true refuge is in the heavens." He pointed upward as he spoke, his gaze unwavering. "What was written by the prophets will be fulfilled." The weight of his words left me uneasy. I tried again to reason with him, my tone now tinged with desperation. "Young man," I said, "you leave me no choice but to turn my advice into a command. The security of this province, which is under my responsibility, demands it. You must moderate your speeches. Do not ignore this order, for you understand the consequences as well as I do. May happiness accompany you." Jesus inclined his head slightly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "May it accompany you, ruler of the earth," he replied, "for you also know the consequences. May happiness accompany you to God." He paused, his voice softening as he continued, "I did not come into the world to bring unrest, but peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. The persecutions you fear will not come from me, but I will face them in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the path I must walk. Control your words. It is not within your power to prevent the victim from standing upon the altar of atonement." With that, he turned and walked away, his form disappearing like a luminous shadow behind the curtains of the horizon. As his presence faded, so too did the weight I had felt in his company, a heaviness I had not realized I was carrying until it was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with a lingering sense of unease. I could not escape the feeling that I had been in the presence of something or someone far greater than I could comprehend. Herod, the aging ruler of the region, had long been entangled in the complex web of politics and religion that defined Judea. His pride and royal stature made him an unlikely ally to anyone who might challenge his authority. Yet when the tide of opposition against Jesus swelled, Herod found himself aligned with the Nazarene's enemies, driven by a mixture of fear and self-interest. If it had been left solely to Herod's will, Jesus' death would have been swift and decisive. However, Herod, despite his arrogance, hesitated to act unilaterally. Perhaps he feared damaging his influence with the Roman Senate, or perhaps, like myself, he harbored a deeper, unspoken fear of Jesus, a fear he could never admit aloud. For a Roman official, especially one of Herod's standing, To acknowledge fear before a Jew would have been unthinkable. Herod's visit to the praetorium seemed almost trivial at first. He came under the guise of casual diplomacy, but his true intent quickly revealed itself. As he rose to leave after an unremarkable conversation, Herod turned to me and asked, almost offhandedly, what I thought of the Nazarene. I replied candidly, explaining that Jesus struck me as one of those rare philosophers that emerge in great nations, a thinker whose teachings, while profound, were entirely removed from political matters. I assured Herod that Rome had no reason to view Jesus as a threat, and that I had allowed him the freedom to speak, because his actions did not warrant any restriction. Herod's response was a sardonic smile, a thin veil over his disdain, as he bowed with exaggerated irony and left without another word. As the days passed, the great feast of the Jews, Passover, drew near. This was always a time of heightened tension in Jerusalem, as fervor and crowds swelled to unmanageable levels. My informants brought troubling news, whispers that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people, ensuring that public sentiment would turn decisively against Jesus. The streets filled with a cacophony of voices demanding his death, and the air grew thick with danger. The unrest became palpable when a Roman centurion was openly disrespected in the streets, a clear sign that the city teetered on the edge of rebellion. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I wrote to the procurator of Syria, pleading for reinforcements to restore order. His reply was curt and disheartening. He lacked sufficient troops to defend even his own province. I found myself isolated, commanding only a small band of veterans in a city that had grown increasingly hostile and rebellious. With no reinforcements and no viable alternatives, I was left with little choice but to tolerate the chaos while maintaining a fragile semblance of control. The leaders of Jerusalem seized their opportunity. Jesus was arrested and brought before the high priest, accused of being a rebel despite the lack of any credible evidence. The accusations were thinly veiled fabrications, yet with the encouragement of their leaders, the mob convinced themselves that Jesus' presence posed a threat to their security. Their chants echoed through the streets, rising like a relentless tide. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" It was not merely the mob that clamored for Jesus' death. Three powerful factions, the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, had united in their opposition to him. The Herodians and Sadducees, though often at odds, shared a dual motivation, a deep hatred for Jesus and a growing resentment of Roman domination. For them, Jesus' teachings were a direct affront to their authority, and their ambitions made them willing to sacrifice even their principles to silence him. These factions had never forgiven me for an earlier incident when I entered Jerusalem with banners displaying the image of the emperor, a grave offense in their eyes. Despite my efforts to correct the mistake, they regarded it as an unforgivable sacrilege. The Pharisees, meanwhile, harbored their own grievances. Jesus had spent years criticizing their hypocrisy, denouncing their rigid traditions, and challenging their hold over the people. His teachings, which emphasized humility and compassion, undermined their carefully constructed image of piety. Their resentment festered, fueled further by my suggestion to use the temple treasury to fund public works, a proposal they viewed as sacrilege. Their disdain for me only deepened when they saw me granting Jesus the freedom to teach. As the city descended further into chaos, Jesus was brought to the high priest and condemned to death. It was at this moment that Caiaphas, the high priest, feigned submission to Roman authority, sending Jesus to me to confirm the sentence and ensure his execution. I responded that, as Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be judged by Herod. I ordered that Jesus be sent to Herod, hoping to deflect responsibility. But Herod, ever calculating, returned the decision to me, claiming deference to Caesar's representative. The responsibility was once again in my hands. The tension reached its breaking point as Jerusalem swelled with crowds descending from the surrounding regions, including Nazareth. It felt as though all of Judea had gathered in the city. My wife, who often claimed to have visions of the future, fell at my feet weeping. She implored me, "Beware, do not touch that man, for he is holy." Last night, I saw him in a vision walking on water, flying on wings of the wind. He spoke to the storm, and the fish of the lake obeyed him. I saw rivers running red with blood, the statues of Caesar weeping, and the sun mourning like a virgin in grief. If you do not heed my plea, great evil will befall you. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate. Fear the wrath of Caesar's throne. Her words shook me, but I could not act solely on the visions of my wife. The marble stairs of the Praetorium trembled under the weight of the crowd, their chants now a deafening roar. Jesus was brought before me once more, and I ascended to the courts of justice, flanked by my guard. I raised my voice above the din, asking the crowd, "What is it that you desire?" Their reply was chilling in its simplicity. "We want the death of Jesus." I asked the crowd in a firm voice, "What is his crime?" Their response came in a cacophony of accusations. He blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. I stood before them, attempting to maintain the composure expected of a Roman governor. "Roman justice does not condemn anyone to death for such accusations," I replied. Yet my words, grounded in reason, were drowned out by the relentless roar of the mob. Their cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" echoed through the halls, shaking the very walls of the Praetorium. Among the chaos, there was one striking figure who remained calm: Jesus. While the crowd raged like a storm, Jesus stood there with a serene demeanor, as if untouched by the venomous hatred surrounding him. His composure only deepened the turmoil in my heart. Despite my authority, I felt powerless against the tide of fury and irrationality that surged through the streets of Jerusalem. After several futile attempts to shield him from the wrath of his enemies, I resorted to what seemed the only course of action that might save his life. Drawing upon a long-standing custom, I proposed releasing a prisoner during the Passover festivities, a gesture meant to appease the people. Surely, I thought, they would choose to spare this man who had done nothing deserving of death. But my hopes were quickly dashed. The crowd, with an unsettling unity, demanded that Jesus be crucified. Desperate to reason with them, I pointed out the glaring inconsistencies in their actions. "Your own laws do not permit this," I argued, detailing the judicial processes that their traditions required. According to Jewish law, no judge could condemn a man without first fasting for an entire day, and the sentence required the unanimous consent of the Sanhedrin, sealed by the signature of its president. Furthermore, no execution could take place on the same day the sentence was given. The law mandated a thorough review of the case on the following day, ensuring that justice was not rushed. I reminded them of the other safeguards embedded in their law. Before an execution, a man was required to stand at the court's entrance with a banner, announcing the name of the condemned, the crime committed, and the witnesses who testified against him. A herald on horseback would ride through the streets, offering the chance for anyone with new evidence to come forward. Even on the path to execution, the condemned could return up to 3 times to present arguments in his defense. "Where are these provisions today?" I demanded, but my words fell on deaf ears. The crowd would not be calmed. Their cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" swelled to an unbearable crescendo, reverberating through the city like a chorus from the underworld. In a last-ditch effort, I ordered that Jesus be scourged, hoping this punishment would suffice to quell their anger. But far from pacifying them, it only seemed to fan the flames of their hatred. The more they saw him suffer, the more they demanded his death. In the face of such unyielding fury, I called for a basin of water. Before the seething masses, I washed my hands, declaring with all the authority I could muster, "I am innocent of this man's blood. In my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth has committed no crime worthy of death." Yet even as I spoke, I knew my words carried no weight with the mob. Jesus' fate had already been sealed. I had witnessed the fury of crowds before, in Pannonia, in the Forum, but nothing compared to the madness that engulfed Jerusalem that day. It was as if all the spirits of the infernal depths had gathered to incite the people. The mob did not move with purpose, but was dragged and spun like a whirlwind, surging in violent waves from the Praetorium to Mount Zion. Their cries and clamors were more than human. They seemed otherworldly, a dark symphony of chaos and hatred. As the day wore on, the skies darkened unnaturally, casting the city in an eerie twilight that reminded me of the omens of the death of Julius Caesar. The Ides of March had returned this time in Jerusalem. Reclining in a corner of my basilica, I watched as the innocent Nazarene was led to his execution. The city seemed to empty itself as its inhabitants streamed through the funeral gates leading to Jamnia. An oppressive air of desolation hung over Jerusalem, as if the city itself mourned what was to come. My heart, heavy with foreboding, joined the procession to Calvary. The centurion struggled to maintain order amidst the chaos, but even his discipline seemed futile. I was left alone, wrestling with a sense of impending doom. A voice within me whispered that this was no ordinary event, no mere human drama. What was unfolding before me felt like a collision of the mortal and the divine, a tragedy that transcended the realm of men. As the winds carried the agonizing cries from Golgotha, they seemed to echo with a suffering never before heard by human ears. Dark clouds gathered over the temple, spreading across the city like a somber veil. Signs appeared both in the heavens and on the earth. It is said that Dionysus the Patriarch cried out, "Either the Creator is suffering, or the universe is collapsing." These words resonated deeply as I observed the unsettling phenomena around me. Suddenly, a violent earthquake shook the land, its tremors reaching as far as Lower Egypt. The superstitious Jews, already gripped by dread, were nearly driven to madness. In Antioch, Bazar, an old Jewish scholar and a close friend of Jesus, was found dead. Whether he died of fright or sorrow, no one could say, but his passing seemed to add another layer of mystery to the events unfolding. The scene was one of cosmic proportions, a convergence of fear, grief, and divine mystery that left even the mightiest trembling. As I gazed upon the desolate city and the darkened skies, I could not escape the sense that what was happening was beyond human comprehension. It was a moment that would haunt me forever. As the first hour of the night approached, I wrapped myself in my cloak, the weight of the day pressing heavily on my shoulders, and descended into the city. The streets, once teeming with the noise of an unruly mob, were now eerily quiet, save for the faint murmurs of those who lingered near the gates of Golgotha. I made my way there, compelled by a force I could not quite name. The sacrifice had been consummated. The man who had stood calm and serene amidst the chaos was now gone. Yet the echoes of his presence lingered in the atmosphere, heavy and inescapable. The crowd, though still agitated, had begun to disperse. There was an air of regret among them, as if the gravity of what they had witnessed was only now beginning to settle upon their spirits. I watched as my small Roman court passed by, their faces downcast and their demeanor subdued. Even the standard-bearer, who typically carried the insignia of Rome with pride, had veiled the eagle in mourning. This simple act spoke volumes, for it was rare for Roman soldiers to display such solemnity, especially for a man condemned as a criminal. As I stood there, I overheard Jewish soldiers murmuring in low tones, their words strange and cryptic. Some spoke of miracles, recounting tales that sounded more like myths, events that the Romans might have attributed to their gods. Others exchanged hushed whispers of fear and confusion. I noticed groups of men and women stopping in their tracks to glance back toward Mount Calvary, their gazes filled with a mixture of awe and dread, as though they were waiting for another sign, something undeniable and divine, to emerge from the darkness. When I finally returned to the Praetorium, my steps were heavy, and my heart even heavier. The stairs leading to my quarters bore fresh stains of blood, the blood of the Nazarene, and as I climbed them, I felt a pang of sorrow that I could not easily dispel. It was then that I saw an old man kneeling near the entrance, his posture one of supplication. He was surrounded by my soldiers, some of whom were openly weeping. This sight unnerved me. It was rare to see Roman men of war overcome by emotion. The old man threw himself at my feet, his body trembling with sobs. There is something profoundly unsettling about seeing an old man cry. It tugs at even the most hardened of hearts, and mine was no exception. My grief, already overwhelming, deepened as I looked upon him. We wept together, bound by a shared sorrow that seemed to transcend words. Around us the crowd had grown silent, their earlier fury replaced by an inexplicable sense of loss. Many of those who had betrayed him, sold him, and shouted for his crucifixion had disappeared, retreating into the shadows like cowards. The few who remained seemed haunted, their faces pale and their eyes wide with regret. One of my soldiers whispered to me that some of the men had washed their mouths with vinegar. A strange act they claimed was tied to something Jesus had said about resurrection and the separation of the dead. I struggled to understand the significance of this, but before I could dwell on it, the old man's voice broke through my thoughts. "Father," I asked, steadying my voice as best I could, "who are you, and what do you want?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied, his voice trembling with emotion. "I come to ask your permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." For a moment I was speechless. His request, so simple yet so profound, cut through the chaos of the day like a blade. I granted his petition without hesitation, instructing Manlius, my trusted officer, to escort Joseph with a group of soldiers. I wanted to ensure that the body would not be desecrated. At the very least, I could offer this small dignity to the man who had faced his fate with such grace. In the days that followed, the city was gripped by an even greater commotion. News spread like wildfire. The tomb where Jesus had been laid was found empty. His disciples, emboldened by this discovery, began proclaiming that he had risen, just as he had foretold. The fervor this sparked was even greater than that of his life, as people scrambled to understand what had happened. I cannot say with certainty what truly occurred, but I investigated the matter thoroughly. Joseph had used his own tomb to bury Jesus, but whether he anticipated or played any role in the events that followed, I could not determine. The day after the burial, a priest came to the Praetorium, his face lined with worry. He confessed that he had not realized Jesus was dead, and expressed concern that his disciples might steal the body to stage a resurrection. Their belief in his prophecy, he feared, could fuel unrest. To address this, I ordered Marcus, my captain, to station Jewish guards at the tomb in sufficient numbers to prevent any tampering. I made it clear that if anything happened, the blame would rest squarely on them, not the Romans. When the news of the empty tomb broke, my unease grew. Marcus informed me that his lieutenant, Ben Isham, had been assigned to guard the site with 100 men. But Isham and his soldiers were deeply shaken by what had transpired. I summoned Isham to the Praetorium, demanding a full account. His words were measured, but his eyes betrayed his lingering fear. "Governor," he began, "it was near the beginning of the fourth watch, when a soft and beautiful light appeared over the tomb. At first I thought it was women coming to embalm the body, but I could not understand how they had passed the guards. Then the light grew brighter, illuminating the entire area as though it were midday. The ground shook beneath us, and we fell, unable to stand." He described seeing figures that resembled the dead, draped in their burial shrouds, yet transformed. "They appeared younger, filled with joy," he said, his voice trembling. "And the air was filled with music, heavenly music, unlike anything I have ever heard. Voices rose in harmony, praising God, as if the heavens themselves were rejoicing." As the earth continued to tremble, Isham admitted that he lost consciousness, overcome by the sheer power of the moment. When he awoke, he found himself face down on the ground, disoriented and afraid. "I did not know what had happened," he confessed, "but when I looked toward the tomb, it was open. The guards were scattered, and I was too shaken to investigate further." His testimony left me conflicted. Was this truly a divine act, or could it be explained away as mere superstition? Either way, the events surrounding Jesus of Nazareth had grown beyond anything I could control. The calm demeanor of the man I had sent to his death now seemed more significant than ever, as though he had known all along what was to come. I questioned the soldier, asking him to describe the state in which he found himself upon regaining consciousness. His reply was unsteady, yet sincere. "I was lying on the ground, face down," he said, his voice carrying a trace of the fear that still lingered within him. I probed further, attempting to ground his extraordinary account in reason. "Could it be," I asked, "that the light you saw was merely the first light of dawn breaking in the east?" He paused, considering my words, before responding with certainty. "At first I thought so, Governor, but only for a moment. I looked around and saw that a short distance away it was still very dark. It was far too early for daybreak." I pressed him further, asking whether dizziness or disorientation could have clouded his senses. "Sometimes," I suggested, "rising too quickly can cause one to feel lightheaded." But he shook his head firmly. "No, Governor, this was no ordinary dizziness or faintness. The light, the tremors, the music, it was all far beyond anything I could explain or comprehend." Next, I inquired about the duration of the events he had witnessed. The soldier hesitated, struggling to quantify the passage of time during such an otherworldly experience. "I cannot say for sure," he admitted, "but it felt as though it lasted nearly an hour. It wasn't until daylight began to cover the scene that it finally subsided." I then asked if he had approached the tomb after regaining his senses. His answer was immediate. "No, I was too frightened. When reinforcements arrived, we all retreated to the barracks without looking back." Curious about the involvement of the priests, I asked if they had interrogated him. He confirmed that they had, and his account revealed the desperation of the religious leaders to control the narrative. "They wanted me to say that it was merely an earthquake, that the guards had fallen asleep, and that the disciples had come to steal the body," he said. "They even offered money for me to support this version of events. But I could not, for I did not see any disciples. I only learned that the body had disappeared after I was told by others." This revelation left me troubled, yet I pressed on, asking for his impression of the priests he had spoken with. His response was telling. "Some of them," he said, "seemed genuinely shaken. They whispered among themselves that Jesus was no ordinary man, that he was not like the rest of us. They speculated that he was not the son of Mary, as it was said, but a figure who had appeared on earth before, in the times of Abraham and Lot, and in other moments throughout history." His words, strange as they seemed, aligned with the growing whispers and testimonies I had heard. It was widely acknowledged, both by those who revered Jesus and those who opposed him, that he possessed an inexplicable command over the natural world. Friends and enemies alike testified to his ability to perform feats that defied understanding. He transformed water into wine, healed the gravely ill, brought the dead back to life, calmed raging storms, and even summoned fish bearing coins in their mouths. These acts, though astonishing, were precisely what had drawn so much hostility toward him. He was not accused of breaking laws or harming others. His only crime was being a man unlike any other. As I reflected on these accounts, I could not help but recall the words spoken by a soldier at the foot of the cross. Truly, this was the Son of God. These words lingered in my mind, stirring a sense of wonder and unease. The more I learned about Jesus, the more I understood why he left such a profound impression on all who encountered him. Jesus of Nazareth was an extraordinary figure, different from any man I had ever known. Pontius Pilate himself described him as of medium height, with a demeanor so calm and serene that it commanded attention without effort. His face, characterized by an expression of kindness and peace, had the power to calm even the tensest situations. There was something about his gaze, deep and penetrating, that seemed to see into the very soul. It was as though he understood the deepest struggles and desires of every person he met. His physical appearance, too, was striking in its simplicity. Accounts describe his long, soft hair, which fell harmoniously over his shoulders. It was said to be somewhat wavy and light brown or even blonde, a feature that stood out among the people of his region. His eyes, one of his most notable features, varied in description from light brown to blue, depending on the observer. They radiated wisdom, kindness, and a quiet strength that seemed to encompass all of life's truths. Jesus' skin was described as fair, with a softness that suggested he lived and worked outdoors, yet it retained a well-cared-for quality. His face, symmetrical and beautiful, inspired both trust and reverence. It was not an intimidating face, but one that conveyed authority and humility in equal measure. He wore a full, neatly kept beard that added maturity and respectability to his appearance. Despite his striking features, Jesus' clothing remained modest. He dressed simply yet with dignity, wearing a clean but unadorned cloak and tunic. He avoided flashy accessories or signs of wealth, a testament to his detachment from material things. His entire presence communicated humility and simplicity, yet there was an undeniable power about him. He was a man who could convey peace and welcome without uttering a single word. Now, noble sovereign, I have taken great care to present the most faithful account of these extraordinary events. I recount them in detail, so that you may evaluate my actions and decisions with fairness. Though I know criticisms have been levied against me, I stand by my conduct. With promises of loyalty and respect toward my emperor, I remain your most obedient servant.